In 1994, when I was just 7 years old, my parents divorced. My mom moved us into my grandparents' old house, which they had recently vacated without selling. The house, a sprawling 3-story building, became home for my 2 older sisters, our dog, and me. The place, though grand, was unnervingly eerie. From the moment we moved in, the basement was the most unsettling part of the house. The stairs leading in a spiral from the basement to the ground floor and up to the second floor creaked with every step. We would often hear footsteps echoing through the house, slow, deliberate steps climbing the stairs, pausing at the ground floor, and then continuing up to the second floor. Sometimes the footsteps would stop out one of our rooms, usually my older sister's, but other times outside mine or my middle sister's room. Despite our attempts to ignore it, the sound of those footsteps became a regular creepy occurrence. Our dog, usually so brave, refused to go near the basement and seemed as terrified as we are. The basement, rather than being a playground, was a source of dread. The lights would flicker off and on, objects would move by themselves, and unsettling noises echoed from within. One evening, while my sisters and I were playing with walkie-talkies, we intercepted a chilling voice on one of the channels. It was a deep, menacing voice that spoke directly to my oldest sister, threatening her and calling her name. The voice seemed to come from close by, but when we turned off the walkie-talkie, the atmosphere grew even more tense. Our dog, always protective, suddenly bolted in our room and barked at seemingly nothing, a rare and unsettling reaction. Another incident occurred when my sisters and our dog were away. My mom and I were home alone. As I played in my room on the second floor, I heard heavy footsteps thunder up from the basement, charging up the stairs and slamming outside my room. The door was slammed shut and refused to open. Even though it didn't have a lock, my mom, frantic, tried to force it open with tools while I cried inside. Just as she was about to break it down, the door mysteriously unlocked and swung open. On a particularly stormy night, when my sisters and her dog were absent, I found myself inexplicably terrified of the thunder, a fear I'd never had before. Down in the basement, chaos erupted. Objects flew around, glass shattered, and we could hear pounding footsteps running up and down the stairs. My mother and I huddled together, both shaken from fear. Another frightening episode involved the entrance door, which flew open and slammed shut repeatedly during the storm. The wind outside was strong, but this was something more sinister. The door's erratic behavior was unnerving, and it felt as if the storm had stirred something malevolent in the house. The events seemed to escalate when our dog was away, and the atmosphere grew darker, especially after my older sister left. The house was a constant source of fear and mystery, with each new incident adding to the chilling legacy of our time. Working graveyard shifts has turned me into a full-fledged night owl. Even on my days off, I'm up all night enjoying the late-night TV and treating myself to a drink in my basement bar, a man cave I've outfitted to perfection. I've spent countless nights down there with friends or alone, never encountering anything out of the ordinary. One night, after a particularly hilarious rom-com, I decided to head down to the bar to pour myself a drink. As I made my way back upstairs, I was startled by an unexpected voice coming from the basement. It was an older man's voice, maybe in his 50s, saying "hey" in a clear and distinct tone. My heart raced, and the last thing I expected was a stranger in my house. I glanced back down the stairs, but there was no sign of anyone. Panic set in as the voice spoke again, this time muffled by the door, asking something that sounded like, "Where you go?" It felt like the voice was directly addressing me, intensifying my fear. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and grabbed a flashlight and baseball bat from the next room. With adrenaline pumping, I returned to the basement, determined to confront whatever was down there. Every light was turned on, every corner thoroughly checked, but the basement was eerily empty. The silence was deafening, and I was left questioning my sanity. The next day, I decided to reach the basement, bat in hand. Nothing had changed. There was no trace of anyone or anything. It was as if the mysterious voice had never been there. The experience left me doubting my own mind. and wondering if I'd lost touch with reality. That night, the events replayed in my head. The eerie voice, the unnerving silence. It all felt too unsettling to ignore. I was determined to find out what was happening. I planned to return to the basement at the same hour, prepared for anything, whether it was a ghostly presence or an intruder. I was ready to uncover the truth. The suspense was unbearable as I walked the darkened rooms, waiting for something to manifest. A few years ago, while my husband was away on a work trip, I was left alone in our quite secluded house. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the darkness seemed to seep into every corner. I decided to cook dinner, the comforting aroma of spices filling the kitchen, to keep myself company. I turned on the news and left the remote on the coffee table before returning to my cooking. As I chopped vegetables and stirred pots, I noticed that the sound of the news had vanished. Confused, I wiped my hands and walked back into the living room, only to be struck with a chilling sight. The TV screen was now displaying a live feed of our own living room. My heart pounded as I realized the TV was showing a direct view of the room I was in. Panic surged through me as I searched for any signs of an intruder. Everything seemed disturbed. The remote was untouched. A cold sweat broke out as the horrifying realization sank in. Someone was watching me through our television. With trembling hands, I grabbed a roll of duct tape and uncovered a camera on the TV, hoping to block whoever was spying on us. For the next few days, the sensation of being watched clung to me. Every creak of the floorboards, sang flicker of the lights made my skin crawl. I was haunted by the thought of how long we had been under surveillance. Then, one evening, I was preparing for bed. A news report grabbed my attention. The deadlines sent a jolt of terror through me. You know, these Samsung smart TVs are quite vulnerable to hacking. The reporter detailed how a security flaw allowed hackers to access the cameras of certain Samsung smart TV models. My mind raced as I recalled our TV being the conduit for someone's invasive gaze. The knowledge that our privacy had been compromised left me in a state of constant dread. Every shadow seemed to harbor a hidden menace, and every sound echoed with suspicion. That night, as I lay in bed, a faint scratching sound began emanating from somewhere in the house. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, the scratching growing louder and more insistent, seemingly closing in on me. Panic gripped me as I reached for the phone, ready to call for help. But just as I was about to dial, the scratching stopped abruptly, leaving behind a profound and eerie silence. I lay frozen, my heart pounding, as the house held its breath. The silence was deafening until the scratching started up again. This time, it was coming from the living room, from the same TV that had once been our unwitting gateway into surveillance. A sickening realization washed over me. The scratching was not the work of an intruder, but something far more sinister. Something that had been lurking within our home all along. As the scratching grew more frantic and relentless, I knew that whatever was on the other side of the TV was not a human. It was something dark, malevolent, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Paralyzed with fear, I understood that our nightmare was far from over, and in the oppressive darkness of the night, with no one to hear our cries, we were at the mercy of whatever lurked in the shadows of that TV screen.